Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 4 of Project Fairy by Jacqueline Wilson, continuing from chapter 8. I was very preoccupied on the way to school, plotting my great escape. When we got to the infant's gate, Robin went skipping off. "Bye, Mum, bye, Mabe, bye, Nibbles," he cried. "Nibbles," Mum said to me. "Oh, it's just a game. I pretended I had a pet mouse," I said. "You too," said Mum. She was looking at me carefully as we went down the road to the juniors. "Have you got something on your mind, Mabe?" she asked. "No," I said, which was probably the biggest lie I've ever told. "You look a bit worried, lovey," said Mum. "You would tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?" "Yes, of course I would," I said. Second biggest lie. Mum was looking so concerned, biting at the skin on her lip. "You're the one who looks worried, Mum." She sighed. "I am a bit. That blooming Mr. Henry's called a staff meeting before we open the shop today. Goodness knows what he's going to be moaning about now. He's making so many changes to the shop, we don't know where we are." Mum yawned. "I'm scared he might change me." She said it like a joke, but I could tell she was serious. "What do you mean, Mum?" "He's always watching me, listening to the way I chat to the customers, especially the old lonely ones. Maybe he thinks I'm wasting time. I get so nervous. Well, I got so nervous yesterday I rang up the wrong item and had to start all over again. What if he thinks I'm a waste of space and gets rid of me?" "Oh, Mum," I said helplessly. "Of course he won't." I gave her a hug. "I bet he thinks you're the best member of staff ever. If I was an old lady, I'd choose your checkout every time because you're so nice." She gave me a big smile, but she still looked worried. She'd have been so much more worried if she knew what I was plotting. Some of the Year 6 boys were larking around in the playground playing football. Mickey was playing too, though he was younger. "Want to join in, Mabe?" he called. "What?" "We don't want some random little girlie," said Joey, Mickey's big brother. "It's bad enough putting up with you, Squirt." "She's not random, she's an ace player," said Mickey, "and she does ballet, so she's dead nimble on her feet." I was astonished. Joey looked amazed too. "What? Oh, I get it, she's your girlfriend," he said, spluttering with laughter. All the other boys joined in too. Mickey went as red as a tomato. "Shut up, you lot. She's not my girlfriend, she's my mate," he said. "Come on, Mabe, we'll play our own game of footy." I was truly touched. Mickey Flynn wanted me to be his mate. We'd always been complete opposites. He was the bad boy and I was the goody-goody girl. We'd hardly spoken to each other before my birthday, but we seemed to get on together now. You knew where you were with Mickey. He didn't cosy up to you one minute and then go off with someone else the next. "Yeah, let's play footy, Mickey," I said. The only trouble was, we didn't have a ball. "We could use your school bag," Mickey suggested. "It's not round, it's kind of oval, but that doesn't matter. We'll play rugger." "Are you serious?" "No," I said, clutching my bag. "It's okay. I won't tackle you too hard," said Mickey. "Use your own school bag," I said. I could feel Bindweed scrabbling in terror. One kick from Mickey could be fatal. "Haven't got one anymore," said Mickey. "I kicked it into someone's garden by accident and it flattened all their prized dahlias, and they wouldn't give it back. My nan won't buy me another one. She wanted me to use a manky old carrier bag. Imagine! I'd be a laughing stock." "So, where are all your pens and pencils and your packed lunch?" "I'll borrow and share," said Mickey. "Is that why you suddenly want to be mates with me?" I said. "No, it's because you're fun," said Mickey. "Come on, let's play." He suddenly pushed my school bag right out of my arms and ran off with it. "Don't you dare kick my bag," I yelled, and I charged after him. He's a fast runner, but so am I, and I barged straight into him and grabbed the bag before he had a chance to kick it. I'm small and thin, but I hurtled at him full on, so he ended up flat on the ground. "Hey, what did you do that for?" he said, starting to roll about, his face agonised. I hoped he was just acting, but I couldn't be sure. "Are you okay?" I asked. "No, I'm not. Look at my knees. I'm bleeding," Mickey groaned. I peered in terror. It was only a drop or two of blood, but it was enough to make me feel dreadful. "Oh, Mickey, I'm so sorry," I said, squatting down beside him, cradling my school bag. I was desperate to peer inside to see if Bindweed was all right. "I promised not to tackle you. I didn't expect you to tackle me," Mickey said. "We'll have to start calling you Mabe the Grab." "Stop it. First you knocked Kathy flying, and now it's my turn," said Mickey, scrambling to his feet. "Shut up." I know he was only joking now, but it worried me all the same, and I was already worried enough. Bindweed didn't seem to be moving. I started hurrying towards the school door. "Hey, wait for me. Forget playing footy. I've been spying on Joey, and I'm pretty sure I've worked out the combination for his padlock. Let's go and see if we can ride his bike," said Mickey. "He'll kill you if he sees you, and probably me too," I said. "No, I want to go into school." "What for?" "It's ages till the bell goes," said Mickey. "I just do. I need to look something up. For my project," I said. "Boring," said Mickey. "What are you doing your project on, eh?" It's a secret, I said quickly. I hadn't made up my mind yet. I wasn't sure the Victorians were such a great idea after all. It might start to be too much like a history lesson. Mrs. Horsley wanted something original. What are you doing for your project, Mickey? I asked. I was sure he'd choose football, like most of the boys, or maybe bikes or a video game. I'm doing spiders, said Mickey. Oh, ha ha, I said sarcastically. I really am. I love spiders. I thought I'd collect a few too and bring them to school. That'll get all the girls squealing, said Mickey, chuckling. That's a rubbish sexist remark. I'm not the slightest bit scared of spiders, I said. It was true. Mum squealed when she spotted a spider, and Robin made a big fuss too, but I could pick one up and put it gently out the window. I wished I'd thought of choosing spiders for my project. It was a great idea. I was pretty certain Kathy would be frightened of spiders. I wondered how Bindweed would feel about them. I wasn't sure how I'd feel if a spider was almost as big as me. Anyway, got to go, I said, running indoors. Little swat, Mickey called after me, but not in a really nasty way. I hurried into the toilets, locked myself in a cubicle, sat on the loo and opened up my school bag. I peered inside anxiously. I couldn't see Bindweed for a moment and panicked, but then I spotted her right at the bottom, still inside my sock, just her green hair sticking out with her cap knocked sideways. Bindweed, I whispered. No one can see you now. We're safe. Safe? Bindweed muttered bitterly. First I go whirling through the air, tumbled around and round until I don't know whether I'm up or down or sideways, and then the snatch monster starts talking about the deadly enemy. The what? The arachnids. The who? The what? The who? Is that your owl imitation? Bindweed asked rudely. What is the point of going to school if they don't educate you? Spiders! The only good spider is an upside-down one with all 8 legs in the air. There's no need to be scared of spiders, Bindweed, I said. There are very few poisonous ones in this country. They're mostly totally harmless, even the big ones. Remind me of that when one of these totally harmless spiders is spinning a tight web around and around me until I can't move, said Bindweed. I'll choke out. Who's right now? With my dying breath. Oh, I see, sorry. So what do you do if a spider comes scuttling along, I asked. I like to keep a blackthorn spear to hand, and then I spear the evil creature right between the eyes, said Bindweed. That's a bit violent, isn't it? I said. I was rather glad Bindweed was very tiny. I wouldn't recommend my chances if she were big and I was small. I heard someone come into the toilets and put my finger to my lips. I pulled Bindweed's sock up around her neck, laid her down on top of my schoolbooks and zipped up my bag, and then I flushed the loo and went outside. I was washing my hands when Billy emerged from one of the cubicles. We looked at each other, looked away quickly, and then looked back again sheepishly. Hi, Billy murmured. Hi, I said back. Thank you for the kitten book. Oh, that's okay. I thought the little ones with the big blue eyes were so cute, said Billy. Yes, they were, I said, though I'd been so absorbed in the fairy book that I'd only glanced at Billy's present. Remember when we used to pretend we were cats? Yeah, we went around meowing all the time. We must have been totally bananas, said Billy. I shrugged. We both knew we'd adored playing the cat game. I was called Tiger and she was called Tiddles, and we went scavenging every playtime. Sometimes the game seemed so real that she stopped being Billy altogether and actually seemed to have a cat face and a long tail. She didn't ever play those kind of games with Kathy and Anita. They just went around and around the playground together with linked arms, talking to each other. Kathy did most of the chatting and Billy and Anita nodded or giggled. It was sickening. Billy washed her hands too, making them extra soapy, and then she blew a bubble. I did the same, and then we both blew lots of bubbles. This was another game we always played together, though once a cleaning lady caught us and told us off for wasting soap. A little clump of younger girls came into the toilets, and Billy looked up anxiously. It's okay. It's not Kathy, I said. Billy looked uncomfortable. How come you're okay when she's not around, but you're mean to me when she is? I asked. I was surprised. I was thinking that, but I hadn't meant to say it out loud. I'm not mean, said Billy. Yes, you are, I said, looking her straight in the eyes. Well, you know what Kathy's like. You have to keep on the right side of her, Billy mumbled. Why? I persisted. Because she's Kathy, Billy said. Well, I'm Mabe. Why don't you want to stay on the right side of me? I said. I do, said Billy, but then Kathy and Anita really did come into the toilets. Billy leapt away from me and started rinsing her hands determinedly. There's a terrible smell in here, said Kathy, holding her nose. Anita held her nose too. The Year 3 girls stared. Didn't you notice the stink, Billy? Kathy asked pointedly. Why aren't you holding your nose? My hands are wet, said Billy. She shook them, spraying little droplets of water, and then turning her back on me, she held her nose. I think there's a terrible, rotten, disgusting smell, I said, but it only started reeking when you came into the toilets, Kathy. One of the Year 3 girls burst out laughing, and the others joined in. I swept out of the toilets, clutching my school bag, feeling triumphant. My hands were still soapy, but I didn't care. I wiped them on my skirt. They left white marks, but at least they were clean marks. I walked into the classroom, put my bag on my desk and unzipped it. Do you want to have a quick peek at my classroom? Bindweed, I whispered. Bindweed struggled upwards. The sock had wound itself around her too tightly now, and I had to help her. She peered round. Mrs. Horsley's classroom was the nicest in the whole school. Whenever a visitor came, they were always shown to our room because it was so colourful, with pictures all over the walls. That's one of my paintings over there, the one with the fair lady and the little boy and the girl. That's my family portrait, I said. My teacher, Mrs. Horsley, said it was ever so good. My family were painted for a portrait once, in the finest of details, said Bindweed, clearly thinking my own painting a mere daub. She didn't seem to think much of our clay animals either, or the papier-mâché puppets hanging from the ceiling, or the life-sized Egyptian mummy, but we'd all had a turn at painting. She shuddered at the bright bookshelves. You won't trap me inside one of those books, will you? Of course not, I said. The only thing she approved of was the vase of flowers from Mrs. Horsley's garden. She stared at the roses, inhaling so deeply that her tiny nostrils quivered. Oh, such sweet perfume! My kinfolk and I love to bind ourselves to those heavenly roses at Wentworth, she said. Can't we go there now? I'm taking you, but I have to get registered first, or Mrs. Horsley will wonder where I am. She might even contact Mum. But I'm going to give her the slip, you'll see. The school bell suddenly rang. Bindweed shrieked and covered her ears. It's okay, it only means school starting. Better bob back in the bag again before they all start trooping in, I said. Kathy and Anita held their noses when they pushed past my desk. Billy put her hand up to do it too, but when she saw me looking, she rubbed her nose with the back of her hand, as if she'd just had an itch. Mickey came in several minutes after all the others, when Mrs. Horsley was starting to take the register. She frowned at him and gestured to him to sit down quickly. He lounged against my desk instead. You missed out big time, Mabe. I got Joey's bike unpadlocked, easy peasy, and once he went into school, I rode the whole way around the playground. You could have had a turn too, he whispered. Mickey Flynn, stop gossiping and sit down at once, said Mrs. Horsley. Sorry, miss, said Mickey cheerfully, and swaggered off to his own desk. I was a little bit envious because I'd always longed to try a proper mountain bike, but maybe I'd get a chance another day. Meanwhile, I had to concentrate on my cunning plan. We had maths and English for the first 2 lessons. They seemed to go on for 6 years at least, and I heard little moans and sighs coming from my school bag. But at last the bell rang again for playtime. I grabbed the bag and ran for it, while most of the class was still dawdling around. Most of the class. Hey, wait for me, Mabe. It was Mickey Flynn, fudding along beside me. Oh, Mickey, look, I'm sorry, I can't hang out, I said hurriedly. Don't be daft. You're heading for the bike sheds, aren't you? It might be a bit dodgy getting on Joey's bike right now when everyone's milling about the playground, but we can give it a go if you like, said Mickey, keeping pace with me now. I'm not going to the bike sheds, I puffed. Yes, you are, he protested. I'm going behind the bike sheds, I said. Now do clear off, Mickey, please. What are you going to do behind the sheds? Mickey asked. There's nothing there, just a scrubby bit of grass and the fence. What are you up to, eh? It was no use trying to shake him off. Look, Mickey, will you swear not to tell on me? I asked. Of course I won't. I'm your mate, aren't I? OK then. I'm bunking off, I said. Mickey's eyes went round. But you're Miss Goody-Goody. Well, I'm Miss Baddie-Baddie today, I said. Is it because those girls are so mean to you, Kathy and her henchmen? No, I've got to go and do something, I said. I can't tell you what. I've got to do it. Hey, are you in real trouble, Mabe? Mickey looked concerned. I'm coming with you. No, you can't. This is something private, and if the 2 of us disappear, then someone's bound to notice. But it's double PE with Mr. Masters till lunchtime, and I'm hoping I'll be back in time for afternoon registration. You'll go without lunch, said Mickey. If I have to, I said. Here. He felt in his trouser pocket and brought out a chocolate biscuit. He took 1 bite and then handed the rest to me. You have it. And don't worry, I won't tell. I'll cover for you. I hope it goes okay. I think I've twigged what you're up to. I was pretty sure he hadn't. It wasn't the likeliest thing in the world to be going to the most terrifying estate in town to release a small bad-tempered fairy. I had no idea what he thought I was doing, but it didn't really matter. Thanks, mate, I said. It sounded a bit silly, like I was an old man, but he grinned at me. And then I dodged behind the bike sheds, hitched my bag over my shoulders, and leapt for the top of the fence. The wood cut in hard on my soft palms, but I still managed to press myself up, get one leg up and over and then the other. I jumped for it and landed clumsily but safely on the other side. I heard Mickey cheering softly as I started running again. I ran in the wrong direction at first because I didn't want to go past the front of the school. The staff room was on the first floor and looked out over the school gate. I couldn't risk Mrs. Horsley idly glancing out the window as she sipped her cup of coffee. She had eyes like a hawk. I did a long loop around the back streets and was completely out of breath by the time I got to the main road again. I had to lean on a wall to recover. Buses and cars and lorries thundered past. I heard faint groans coming from my school bag, and when an ambulance shrieked its way through the traffic, there was frantic burrowing in the bag as Bindweed tried to bury herself in its depths, appalled by the noise. I hurried along the road towards the big shopping centre, where the streets were pedestrianised. I dawdled for just a moment outside a bicycle shop, peering at the mountain bikes and the electric scooters. I wondered if Bindweed would be so grateful to me for taking her to Wentworth that she'd grant me a wish. A magic little fish in one fairy story granted an old fisherman a palace with gleaming golden thrones for him and his wife. I was quite happy to stay in our housing association flat. All I wanted was an electric scooter, but a bike would do, preferably a mountain one. It didn't have to be gold, it didn't have to be gleaming. A second-hand one off eBay would be fine. My bag started shaking. Bindweed was jumping up and down impatiently. She didn't seem to be in the mood for granting wishes. She was more a casting evil spells type of fairy. I knew I had to get her to the Wentworth estate as fast as possible, or I might find donkey's ears sprouting out of my head or a wart as big as a boiled egg throbbing at the end of my nose. It didn't do to loiter anyway, as several people were staring at me curiously, clearly wondering what I was doing going around the shops by myself instead of being in school. They might approach me any second and inquire. I quickly clasped my cheek, grimaced and walked on purposefully, as if I had an urgent dental appointment. I went out the other side of the shopping centre, down several streets of semis, on and on, my two small trainers painfully squashing my toes. By the time I was approaching the Wentworth estate up the hill, I was limping. "We're nearly there," I said, talking into my school bag. I felt a flutter inside and the sound of small hands clapping. I was in a flutter myself, but not with joy. The Wentworth estate looked bigger and bleaker than ever, its tall towers casting shadows over the piles of rubbish and burnt-out cars. And I couldn't help but remember all the stories I'd been told about the place. Luckily, there was hardly anyone about, just a mother with a ponytail and fierce eyebrows pushing a screaming baby in a buggy, and an old lady with a cardie over her nightie, slowly making her way along the tarmac with a Zimmer frame. I breathed a sigh of relief. Neither were likely to beat me up. I supposed most people were out at work or at school. I couldn't see any gangs of wild teenagers, thank goodness. If there really were any, and they were as scary as some people said, they were probably still fast asleep in bed after a night out, getting up to no good. What would happen if anyone horrible spotted Bindweed? One stamp of their boot and she'd be finished. And there were no gardens anywhere, so why she wanted to live here was a mystery. I looked and around for somewhere relatively private where I could release her. I tried a stairwell, but it smelled as if someone used it as a toilet. In the end, I went up to the top floor of the nearest block, so Bindweed could peep out and direct me to her favourite place. The lift wasn't working, so I had to walk up the steps. Up and up and up. It felt as if I'd gone right up above the clouds by the time I emerged on the top balcony. I sat down on someone's rubber doormat and undid my school bag. "We're here," I whispered inside. "It's safe to come out now." Nothing happened. "Bindweed?" I said anxiously. Still nothing. I reached down into the bag and gently lifted her to the top, still inside the sock. She was lying motionless, eyes closed, face pearly white. For a terrible moment I thought she was dead. But then she sighed and opened her eyes. "I feel so sick," she murmured, and then turned her head and actually was sick, vomiting strange greeny liquid down onto my school books, pens and pencils, and Mickey's chocolate biscuit. I was particularly sad about the biscuit because I was starving after my long walk and a great climb upwards. "Oh dear, poor Bindweed," I said. "I suppose you've been travel sick." "You've taken me up and up and up," Bindweed groaned weakly. "I feel so dizzy." "Try breathing deeply," I suggested. "I have altitude sickness, you foolish girl. I'm barely capable of drawing breath." Bindweed snapped. She peeled off the sock and climbed out of the bag, and then shrieked as a flock of birds flew past. Are we up a tree?" she gasped. "Hide me from those winged monsters." "They're not fierce birds. They're only those black ones with little shiny bits," I said. "They're completely harmless." Tell that to all the worms they peck, said Bindweed, scrambling up to my shoulders. All birds are enemies to fairies, especially starlings. She squeezed inside the neck of my blouse until only her head stuck out. She was a little soggy now, but I tried not to mind. Anyway, we're not up a tree. We're at the top of a block of flats, so you can see out, I said. This is not a flat. This is an immensely high, said Bindweed. Where is the bleak and dreadful place? It's the Wentworth estate, I said. Don't be ridiculous. How dare you mock me like this? I thought you were a kind, obedient girl, Bindweed said furiously. I am. I've done exactly what you asked me to do, and if anyone finds out at school, I'll be in terrible trouble, and they'll tell Mum, and then she'll start worrying and might even get ill like she did before, and Robin and I will get taken away again, I said, and the panic started up again. I found I was shaking and couldn't stop, even though I clenched my fists and willed myself to calm down. Bindweed was momentarily distracted by my state. There now, she said, and she patted me with her tiny hand. I don't know why you're so distressed, but I'm sure you have nothing to worry about. I'm the one who should be distraught. I want to go back to my dear leafy Wentworth, please, not this ugly derelict nightmare without even a blade of grass. But I absolutely promise you, this is Wentworth. I think it just looks different because we're so high up. We'll go down to the ground again and then you'll maybe recognise it, I said, calming down a little. I hadn't had a panic like that for a long time and it frightened me. I wanted to forget all about this ridiculous rehoming mission and rush back to school straight away before anyone realised I was missing. Well, Mickey knew, but I trusted him. I knew he'd never tell on me. It was funny. Billy had been my best friend ever since I came to this school, but I'd never been absolutely certain she wouldn't tell all my secrets. And I'd been right. I sighed. Bindweed sighed too. This is definitely not Wentworth. But do let's descend. It's making me feel extremely giddy. Hop back in the bag then, I said. Absolutely not, said Bindweed in horror. It is polluted now. She was the one responsible for the polluting, and fairy sick didn't really smell very strongly, but I suppose I wouldn't have wanted to ride in a bag full of sick either. I didn't quite know how I was going to clean it all up, but I would face that problem later. I tucked her into my collar, and then we went all the way down the stairs again. It took forever. It felt as if we might reach Australia any minute. I hoped the old lady in the nightie with the Zimmer frame lived on the ground floor. And how would the mum with the ponytail and the baby and the buggy manage all those stairs? When we were down in the ground again, I walked right around the estate, my heart thudding. Even Mickey would never dare stroll casually into Wentworth. My school uniform marked me out as a stranger too. I was like a moving target. I don't like it here, Bindweed said underneath my chin. Neither do I said. This must be a mistake. This isn't Wentworth, Bindweed insisted. Oh, yes, it is, I said. It sounded as if we were taking part in a pantomime. The old lady in the nightie was still creeping along. She turned at the sound of my voice. Were you talking to me, dear? She asked. You'd have to speak up. I'm a bit deaf nowadays. I was just wondering if this is the Wentworth estate, I said. Well, it's not Buckingham Palace, is it? She said, cackling. So it definitely is the Wentworth estate, I went on. The one and only, she said. I've been living here since I was a kiddie, when it was built. I could see she was very old, but she couldn't possibly have been born way back in the Victorian age. She saw me looking puzzled and shook her head at me. It wasn't always an estate like this, she said. Wentworth used to be a beautiful big country house, famous for its gardens. My granny used to go there when the garden was open to the public. She said there were so many roses the smell made you dizzy. Yes, Bindweed burst out. She spoke in the tiniest voice, but the old lady nodded her head as if she could hear her in spite of her deafness. Pink roses, white roses, yellow roses, but she said the best were the deep red roses, the old lady mused. Bindweed nodded emphatically, her ringlets tickling my neck. I couldn't help looking around, wondering if a single rose bush might remain, but it was all asphalt and concrete everywhere. There weren't even any weeds. You won't see any here now, girlie, the old lady chuckled. The soldiers lived here for a bit in the war, and then the house went back and, well, it went to rack and ruin. So they knocked it down and bulldozed the grounds and built the estate. How dreadful, I said. But it was lovely in the beginning, very smart, and all the folk who'd been living in grimy terraces with no hot water and toilets in the backyard thought it was their idea of heaven. But it's a dump now, I grant you. Still, it's home to me. They want me to go out into an old folks' home since I broke my hip, but I'm not having it. There's no place like home. Your real home. She crept forward, hunched over her Zimmer frame. Step, tap, painfully slowly. Can I help in any way? I asked. I'm fine, dearie, she said. Just taking my exercise. I'll do a star jump in a second. What a lovely old lady, I whispered to Bindweed. She wasn't listening. She had cast herself down on my shoulder. There's no place like home, she repeated brokenly. But I haven't got a home any more. She gave a little tearful sniff. Where are my people? Am I alone? Where do all the fairy folk live now? I'm so sorry. I didn't realise it used to be different. I couldn't understand why on earth you wanted to live here again, so what shall we do now? I don't know, Bindweed said, and started sobbing. Chapter 9. I didn't know where to take Bindweed. The nearby streets had houses with little gardens, but some had been concreted over to make space for a car, and the gardens that were left weren't very picturesque. I couldn't spot a rosebush anywhere. I couldn't simply abandon her in a patch of grass and hope for the best. Besides, I had to get back to school before I was found out. Don't worry, I'll find you a lovely new home, I promise. But right now, you'll have to come back to school with me, or I shall get into terrible trouble. I don't like your school, Bindweed wailed. I don't like it very much either, but I have to go, that's the rule, I said. I'm so glad I am me and not you. Fairies delight in breaking the rules. We don't plod along dully doing things we don't want to do, said Bindweed. I don't plod. I ran like the wind to get out of school, and I'm not dull, I'm very daring. No one else would bunk off school and go to the Wentworth estate, I said hotly. Now just stop your moaning and come with me. I wasn't cross enough to stuff her back in the school bag. I couldn't run properly with Bindweed down my neck because she was half choking me. In the end I stuffed her down one of the socks I was wearing and set off. She clasped me around my ankle bone and moaned that she was feeling dizzy as I sped along. I can't win. You sneer at me for plodding and whine when I go fast. I've got to hurry. I can't miss afternoon registration, I panted. In actual fact, I got back in the middle of lunchtime. I was able to grab a slice of pizza and an apple. I slipped a little morsel of both into my sock under cover of the table so that Bindweed had lunch too. Billy and Anita and Kathy were right over the other side of the dining hall, taking no notice of me. Mickey was too, but he waved when he spotted me and came charging over, stuffing a banana down his throat. Mickey Flynn, will you sit down until you've actually finished your lunch? Said a dinner lady. You'll give yourself terrible hiccups. Got them already, miss, said Mickey cheerfully, and hiccuped loudly to demonstrate. He sat down beside me. No one noticed you were missing, he said. Well, Kathy asked where you'd got to, and I said, Hick. You felt sick and had to go to the toilets, so that shut her up. Thanks, I said. Drink a glass of water from the wrong side and it'll cure your hiccups. He tried with a lot of spluttering and several hicks, but by the time he'd got to the bottom of the glass, it had worked. Hey, you're magic, Mabe, he said. He lowered his voice. So, where did you really go, eh? I went for a stroll around the Wentworth estate, I said. Oh, ha ha ha, said Mickey. Where did you really go? I won't tell, I swear. I bet you went to meet your dad. I stared at him in astonishment. No, I didn't. It's okay, I get it. Me and my brother sometimes see my mum and her new boyfriend in secret. We don't let on to Nan because it upsets her. She's scared we'll go off and live with Mum and some stepdad. As if, said Mickey. Well, I haven't got a stepdad, and I won't ever have one because Mum still hopes our dad will come back, though that isn't going to happen in a million years, I said, sighing. But you'd like it if he did, eh? No, I wouldn't. He made my mum very unhappy, I said, but Mum wants him back. What about you? Don't you miss him? Mickey asked curiously. Not one bit. I couldn't care less about him, I said. This was a really big lie, and it worried me. I couldn't cross my fingers because Mickey could see. I crossed my ankles instead. There was a small scream from the regions of my sock. What was that? Said Mickey, his nose wrinkling. I didn't hear anything. I lied again. Do you think it was a mouse squeaking? Said Mickey. He peered under the table before I could stop him, but Bindweed dived further down my sock out of sight. If she could do that, it meant I hadn't hurt her too badly. Let's go around the bike sheds then, said Mickey. Have you ever tried out a mountain bike? I hadn't ever ridden any kind of bike, apart from a toddler trike when I was about 2, but I knew I'd just sit on the saddle, grasp the handlebars and start pedalling, and I'd be off, practically flying down the road, everyone taken aback by my style and speed. Marvel Mabe, champion biker. But there was no chance of living out my fantasy because Mickey's brother Joey was there himself with one of his mates, and they were using the side of the bike sheds to play kick the ball. Then my own brother came rushing up. There you are, Mabe. I've been looking everywhere for you, he said, flinging his arms around my waist. Oh, Robin, don't be such a little wuss, I said, but I hugged him back hard, feeling guilty. What's a wuss? He asked. It's a little softy squirt like you, said Mickey. I'm going to have to teach you to be tough like me. Want to learn to box? Put your fists up. He's too young to box. Don't you dare hit him, I said, but Mickey winked at me. He just danced around Robin, and Robin danced too, and Mickey dabbed at his chest and head and bent down to let Robin do the same to him. And then Mickey pretended Robin had won the first round and raised his arms in the air and called him a champion. "You're brilliant with Robin, Mickey," I said when we went into school. "He loved you boxing with him." "I'll teach you to box if you like. Then you can knock Kathy flying," he said. "Her mum would go bonkers if I did," I said, though the thought was glorious. Kathy held her nose as I went into the classroom, and Anita did too, and Billy. "What's that awful smell?" said Kathy. Mickey took a big sniff and then doubled up, nose wrinkled, tongue hanging out at the side of his mouth, a cartoon of disgust. "Ugh," he said. "It's Catty Kathy, and she's just made the yuckiest smell ever." All the boys started laughing, and even some of the girls, and then Mrs. Horsley came into the classroom. "That's what I like to see, happy smiling faces," she said. "Now let's settle down for our art lesson. You painted some lovely landscapes last time. Let's check. Does everyone remember what a landscape is?" "Yes, Mrs. Horsley. I've got a phone, so I know it's when you take a photo of something sideways with it," said Kathy. Her face was still red with fury and humiliation, but she couldn't miss this chance of pointing out that she had her own smartphone. We weren't allowed to take phones to school, but Kathy often did. "You're quite right, Kathy. Taking a photo sideways is indeed called landscape, and portraits are taller up than across. But photographs are very different from paintings. Can anyone tell me why?" "Photos can make you laugh, Mrs. Horsley, like videos. I like funny cats on YouTube," said Billy. "That's true," said Mrs. Horsley. "Photos are better because they show what things are really like," said Anita. "Especially if you've got a great camera," said Kathy. "Sometimes paintings can make you feel more, though," said Mrs. Horsley. "A great artist can paint things in such a way that you feel happy or so moved that your heart starts thumping. What do we call those feelings?" "Acting soft, miss," said Mickey. Mrs. Horsley sighed. "They're emotions, Mickey. Now, remember Van Gogh's painting of a yellow cornfield and Monet's bright poppies. She pointed to the pictures pinned on the wall. How do they make you feel?" "They didn't make me feel particularly happy, especially with the problem of a home for bindweed looming large, but I knew the answer she was hoping for." "Happy, Mrs. Horsley," I said. "Exactly. Well done, Mabe," said Mrs. Horsley. "They might not be exact reproductions of real cornfields and poppies, but they're somehow better, because they make us feel glad to look at them. Lovely, vibrant colours. Now, how do you feel when you look at this painting?" she asked, this time showing us a painting of a lady in a white dress, fast asleep with a horrible gargoyle creature crouching on her tummy in the gloomy darkness. "This is called The Nightmare, by a painter called Henry Fuseli. So, it makes you feel—" "Frightened," we chorused, apart from Mickey, who squatted on his chair and pulled a horrible gargoyle face in imitation. "That's enough, Mickey," said Mrs. Horsley wearily. "Right, everyone, time to paint some pictures. Landscape, portrait, whatever you fancy. But I want to see if you can convey some kind of emotion with your choice of colour. Show me how you are feeling today." She handed out sheets of paper and told us to choose our paints. There was a big rush to grab the yellow and red pots. I didn't care. I took a pot of white and a pot of black. I decided to try a cityscape, and as long as I had black and white to make different shades of grey, I was happy. Bindweed seemed bored by this lesson and was very still, probably asleep, which was a relief. "What's that you're painting?" Mickey asked, craning over to see. "It's the Wentworth estate," I said, carefully painting grey slabs of concrete. "You're so weird," said Mickey. He couldn't make up his mind whether to do a yellow cornfield or red poppies, so he did both, sloshing the yellow paint on liberally and then dotting in lots of red flowers. He didn't wait for the paint to dry properly, so the red ran all over the paper, making it look as if there had been a terrible slaughter in the cornfield. "Oh well, it's like one of those modern paintings where it's all splashes," said Mickey. He looked a bit like a painting himself, with yellow on his sleeves and the tip of his nose and red all over his fingers. Mrs. Horsley sighed at him when she came round to look at our paintings. "I should have a good scrub before you go home, Mickey," she said. "Still, it looks as if you've been enjoying yourself." She looked worried when she saw my own painting, though I'd done it as carefully as I could. I'd even made a special dark shade of grey for the shadows. I painted the people grey too, a mum with a pushchair and an old lady with a Zimmer frame at opposite ends of the picture. "You've painted your landscape beautifully, Mabe. Well done. It's very effective." "It does all look very bleak," she said. Mrs. Horsley had obviously never been around the Wentworth estate. "Perhaps you could put a few dabs of colour here and there. Maybe several of the flats could have bright curtains. And there could be a little girl like you skipping along the path between the buildings. Bring in some happy feelings too. I know, you could make a little garden in this corner here, with bright green grass and lots of pretty flowers," she suggested. "Flowers?" A small voice echoed longingly from the floor. Bindweed had obviously woken up. Luckily I had my hand over my mouth, so Mrs. Horsley thought it was me. "That's right," she said. "Otherwise it's such a sad painting." She paused, still looking worried. She bent down beside me and said very softly, "Do you feel really sad, Mabe?" I thought about it. I always felt a bit worried about Mum and angry about Dad and upset that Billy didn't want to be my friend anymore, and now I had this new and pressing problem about rehoming a fairy. But I didn't feel sad exactly. No, I'm fine, Mrs. Horsley, I said, as brightly as I could, but I'll try to make my picture more cheerful. It was actually good fun adding little dabs of colour here and there. I gave the mum a smiley face and added a small boy like Robin, skipping along beside her in his favourite red hoodie, like Little Red Riding Hood. I painted a goofy-looking me in a yellow t-shirt and blue jeans chatting to the old lady with the Zimmer frame, and I turned her faded nightie into a long dress patterned with flowers. I made a garden too and painted it with roses. I gave the biggest rose a little splodge of white that could just be a fairy. I wished it was possible to make everything as bright and happy in real life. I was really pleased when Mrs. Horsley held up my picture for the whole class to see at the end of the art lesson. Teacher's pet, Mickey mocked predictably, but he clapped me on the back. Well done, though. You aren't half artistic. I don't think it's that great, said Kathy, when Mrs. Horsley was busy putting all the paintbrushes in the sink. I think it looks stupid. Don't you, Anita? Yeah, it looks kind of rubbish, said Anita. What do you think, Billy? Kathy asked. Billy sniffed. She shrugged. I suppose, she muttered. You suppose what? Kathy asked. Billy glanced at me. She bit her lip. You don't like it, do you? Kathy continued. No, it's not my sort of thing at all, said Billy. I mean, it's quite well painted, but... No, it's not. It's horrible, said Kathy, and she gave Billy a sharp nudge. Isn't it? No, I mean, yes. Whatever, said Billy. What do you mean, whatever? Kathy demanded. I think it looks awful, said Billy, giving in. I drooped in my chair. Why couldn't Billy stick up for me just once? We used to love drawing together at playtimes. She always begged me to do the heads of the girls, because she said I could do them much better than she could. She often said I was heaps better at art than she was. I knew she was only saying my painting was awful to keep in with Kathy, but it still hurt. My ankle prickled, my sock was being pulled this way and that, bindweed was climbing out of it. I panicked and bent down to stuff her back in, but she was too quick for me. She jumped down to the floor and scuttled forward before I could stop her. I stared as she made her way around chair legs and hurtled over feet. What was she playing at? Someone could so easily spot her if they glanced down. They might think she was a green and white spider and scream or stamp on her. Mabe, are you all right, dear? Mrs. Horsley called from the front of the class. I had to straighten up, the blood throbbing in my head. Yes, Mrs. Horsley, I was just, she said, her head on one side. Scratching my leg, I added lamely. Kathy giggled. Searching for fleas, she said, barely lowering her voice. Anita giggled too, and Billy. Mrs. Horsley frowned. Don't be silly, girls. Settle down now. I couldn't settle. Bindweed seemed to be making her way towards Kathy. I felt a moment of deep despair. Was she going to leave me and make friends with Kathy too? I had one more glance. She'd actually reached Kathy's snow-white designer trainers. Was she about to climb up her leg and beg to be her fairy? Mabe, Mrs. Horsley was starting to be irritated now. Do sit up straight. I just had time to see that Bindweed was stealthily undoing the laces in Kathy's dazzling trainers. I sat upright, wondering what on earth she was doing. Now, I'd like to discuss your projects with you, said Mrs. Horsley. You've had a little time to think about it. I hope you've all decided what you want to do. I'm going to give out the special project notebooks now, so you can take them home for the weekend and make a start. Is that homework, miss? Mickey asked, sounding horrified. I don't think we had to do any homework in our year. It's not homework, Mickey. It's project work, some of which you might care to do at home. There's a subtle difference, said Mrs. Horsley. Right, you can start the ball rolling. What is your project going to be about? Spiders, miss, said Mickey. There was a chorus of yews and yucks, but Mrs. Horsley actually smiled. A very good idea, Mickey. Well done. So what are you going to write about spiders? She asked. Well, the different sorts, especially tarantulas. They're the best. I could try drawing one, I suppose, but as you know, I'm not that great at art. I'll download a picture instead and print it out, he said. That will be a good start, but I shall want you to expand your ideas considerably. Maybe you could write about the way many people react to spiders and see if you can find out how they make their webs. You could find examples of spiders in storybooks and art and films. There's so much you could write about, said Mrs. Horsley. Bit too much if you ask me, said Mickey. And I do ask you, Mickey, because I am your teacher and you are supposed to follow my suggestions with good grace, said Mrs. Horsley. Yes, miss, said Mickey, knowing when he was defeated. Now, Billy, what are you going to do for your project? Mrs. Horsley asked. Cats, miss, said Billy. No, you're not, said Kathy. We're going to work on a joint project about dance, you and me and Anita. I'm going to do ballet, Mrs. Horsley, because I go to lessons and I'm always picked for the lead role. I don't want to boast, but I'm the best. Anita can do Indian dancing because she knows all about it, and Billy can do ballroom because she likes Strictly. Yes, but I like cats more, said Billy. Couldn't we do a joint project on cats? I'm allergic to cats, you know I am, and I don't even like them. Dogs are much more fun, said Kathy. There was an immediate, heated argument all around the classroom. Cat people versus dog people. I liked both, but was too concerned about bindweed to take part. Mrs. Horsley clapped her hands. Settle down, everyone. We're discussing projects, not having a debate about cats and dogs. Billy, I think a cat project is a splendid idea. You're obviously very interested in them. I am. I know all about cats and kittens. Billy suddenly looked stricken. Oh no, I've given my kitten book to someone else. She looked in my direction. I'll give it back. Don't worry. I mouthed at her, and she looked relieved. Perhaps you can write about the history of cats too. Did you know that the ancient Egyptians used to worship cats? Said Mrs. Horsley. Oh, I've seen a cat mummy in the British Museum. My dad took me, said Anita. Could I write about the ancient Egyptians for my project, Mrs. Horsley? Of course you can. I hope you draw me lots of mummies and pyramids, said Mrs. Horsley. Well, I'm still doing a project on dancing, said Kathy, very much in a huff. I'll do lots of drawings of ballet dancers. I can even stick in photos of me at dancing displays. My mum always takes heaps. And I tell you what, I could actually do a demonstration. I can do pirouettes, 6 at a time without losing my balance once. Look. She stood up, held her head high, her arms spread, but before she danced a single step, she went crashing to the floor, landing on her bottom. Very graceful, said Mickey, and the whole class burst out laughing. Kathy, oh dear, are you all right? Mrs. Horsley cried, rushing to pick her up. Goodness, you've got your trainer laces all tangled together. No wonder you fell over. Someone's tied them up deliberately to make a fool of me, Kathy roared, and I know who. It's Maeve. She keeps bullying me, just because Billy wants to be my friend now. Now calm down, Kathy, said Mrs. Horsley, checking her over for bumps and bruises. I know you're very upset, but you mustn't make silly accusations. How could Maeve have possibly tampered with your shoes? She sits 3 tables behind you. She was bending down earlier. She could have reached out and done it, Kathy insisted. Maeve hasn't got 6-metre-long arms, you twerp, said Mickey. Then you did it, Mickey Flynn, said Kathy. I've been sitting here all lesson, said Mickey. How could I have done it? Well, someone did, Kathy spluttered, nearly in tears. I knew who the someone was. She had scuttled back to my sock now and was hopefully completely hidden. I could hear tiny peals of laughter. What's that funny little noise? Asked Mickey, who had very sharp ears. Sorry, it was me, I whispered quickly. I couldn't help it. Kathy looked so funny. Bindweed had played a trick on Kathy because she'd been so sneery about my painting. She didn't want to be her friend. She was my friend, a very special friend. So Kathy was her enemy. I'm telling my mum, said Kathy. There's nothing to tell, dear, said Mrs. Horsley briskly. You simply took a little tumble because your shoelaces got tangled. When you've done your dancing project, you can wear your ballet shoes to demonstrate your lovely pirouettes. Now, who's next? Victoria put up her hand. She's the cleverest in our class. She's quite a nice girl, but very earnest. I'd love to do a project on the Victorians, Mrs. Horsley, she said. Her eyes shone behind her glasses. I want to write about Queen Victoria herself and the life of very rich people with lots of servants, and I'm going to compare their lives with very poor people begging in the streets without enough to eat. I thought I'd write it as if I'm an interviewer going back in time, asking them all sorts of questions. That's a splendid idea, Victoria, and very appropriate given your name, said Mrs. Horsley. It was a splendid idea. The trouble was, it had been my idea too, though I hadn't got as far as planning it because I'd been so busy with bindweed. I wish I'd thought about it a bit harder. Mrs. Horsley was looking straight at me now. What's your project going to be, Mabe? She asked. I hesitated. It would sound as if I were copying Victoria if I said I wanted to do a project on the Victorians too. I couldn't even think about an original way of presenting it. I tried to think of another good subject for a project. It was hopeless. Bindweed was still distracting me. She was poking me now with her little fingers, sharp as pins. Speak up, Maeve, Mrs. Horsley prompted. She can't think of anything, said Kathy, sniffing. She smiled spitefully. I know what you can choose. Fairies, and you can dress up in that rubbish fairy outfit of yours. The class looked stunned and then started sniggering. Yes, said a tiny voice at my ankle. Yes, said Mickey. I took a deep breath. Yes, I said. That's a great idea, Kathy. I know quite a bit about them already, but I shall try to find out more. I shall do a project on fairies. And that is where we will leave part 4 of Project Fairy by Jacqueline Wilson. I'll be back soon with lots more stories and videos coming your way on my channel very, very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.